I knew something was wrong the second I pulled onto Willow Creek Drive that Tuesday evening in February and saw the silver Lexus SUV sitting in my parking spot again. The third nor'easter of the season was barreling toward Buffalo, New York, and I had spent 2 hours that morning with my snowblower clearing out that spot, throwing 20 inches of heavy, wet snow into the designated pile area. My hands still ached from gripping the machine, my back still protested from the physical labor, and now Brenda Mitchell's vehicle sat exactly where I needed to park mine. I sat in my truck at the entrance to the townhome complex parking lot, engine running, watching my breath fog up the windshield despite the heater blasting. The weather forecast played on the radio, warning that the incoming blizzard would be worse than the previous storms, with predictions of 30 to 40 inches and wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour. They were calling it a once-in-a-decade storm. The governor had already declared a state of emergency, and Brenda Mitchell, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, had parked in my cleared spot for the third time in 2 weeks. My name is Kenneth Dawson, and I had lived in this townhome community for 5 years without major incident, until Brenda took over as HOA president 8 months ago. The woman was 52 years old, drove a vehicle that cost more than my annual salary, and seemed to believe that her position gave her authority over every aspect of our lives. She had shoulder-length blonde hair that she kept meticulously highlighted, wore designer athleisure, where even though I had never seen her exercise, and had a habit of standing with her hands on her hips when she wanted to intimidate someone. I pulled my truck into a visitor spot 3 rows away from my building and sat there for a moment, weighing my options. The complex had assigned parking, clearly marked with numbers corresponding to each unit. Mine was spot 42, directly in front of my ground-floor townhome. Brenda lived in Unit 67, which had its own assigned spot on the other side of the complex. There was absolutely no legitimate reason for her to be in my space. The wind picked up as I climbed out of my truck, carrying the first flurries of the approaching storm. I pulled my coat tighter and walked toward my building, past the Lexus sitting smugly in my spot. A bright orange parking violation sticker would have been visible on the windshield if this were a normal situation, but Brenda was the one who authorized those stickers. She was not about to ticket herself. I unlocked my front door and stepped into the warmth of my townhome, immediately heading to my desk where I kept all my HOA documentation. I pulled out the community bylaws, the parking regulations, and my lease agreement. Everything was crystal clear. Assigned parking meant assigned parking. The rules stated that vehicles parked in spots other than their assigned space could be towed at the owner's expense after a warning. I had given Brenda 2 warnings already, documented in emails that she had never bothered to respond to. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Marcus Thompson from Unit 41. "Dude, she did it again. This is insane." I typed back quickly. "I'm handling it this time. For real." I opened my laptop and searched for towing companies in Buffalo that operated 24 hours. The first 3 I called said they were not taking any new calls due to the incoming storm. The fourth, Angelo's Towing and Recovery, answered on the second ring. "Angelo's, this is Pete speaking. Hi, I need a vehicle towed from my townhome complex. It's parked illegally in my assigned spot and I have documentation." There was a pause. "You know there's a blizzard coming, right? We're slammed." "I know. I can pay extra for the emergency service. This person has done this multiple times and I need my spot cleared before the storm gets bad. I cannot park 3 rows away and carry groceries through 3 feet of snow." Pete sighed. "Where are you located?" "Willow Creek Townhomes off Maple Road, All right. I can have someone there in 45 minutes, but it's going to cost you $150 for the emergency call-out fee, plus the standard towing charges that the vehicle owner will have to pay to get their car back. That's fine. I'll pay it. I need the details. What's parked there? Silver Lexus SUV, New York plates. I rattled off the license plate number. And you're the assigned parking spot holder. You have documentation. Yes. I can show your driver my lease agreement, the parking assignment sheet from the HOA, and the community bylaws. I also have emails documenting previous violations. Good enough. We'll see you soon. Name, Kenneth Dawson. Sit tight, Kenneth. I hung up and immediately felt a mix of satisfaction and anxiety. Brenda was going to lose her mind, but I was done being a doormat. The woman had made my life miserable since becoming HOA president. Issuing petty violations for things like leaving my garbage, been out an hour past collection time, or having a package on my doorstep for more than 24 hours. She had threatened to fine me $200 for hanging a small American flag on my front door, claiming it violated the exterior decoration policy, even though 3 other units had similar flags. When I pointed this out, she simply said she would get to them eventually. I made myself a sandwich and watched from my front window as the snow began to fall harder. The wind rattled the glass. According to the weather app on my phone, we had maybe 6 hours before the worst of the storm hit. After that, the roads would be impassable. 30 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck with Angelo's towing painted on the side rolled into the parking lot. I grabbed my folder of documentation and headed outside. The driver was a stocky guy in his 30s wearing a heavy work coat and a knit cap. Kenneth Dawson. That's me. I'm Joey. Pete sent me. Show me what you got. I walked him through everything, showing him my lease, the parking assignment, the community rules, and the emails I had sent to Brenda. Joey looked it all over, took photos with his phone, and nodded. Yeah, this is clear cut. You're good. Let me hook it up. As Joey worked on securing the Lexus to the flatbed, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. Brenda Mitchell came storming across the parking lot, her designer boots crunching through the snow. She wore a cream-colored parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the wind. I turned to face her calmly. "I'm having your vehicle towed from my assigned parking spot. You cannot do that. I'm the HOA president. That doesn't give you the right to park in my spot. I've asked you twice to stop. I have it all documented." Her face flushed red, visible even in the dim evening light. "This is harassment. I'll have you fined. I'll have you brought up on charges." Joey straightened up from where he was working. "Madam, this is a legal tow. The resident has proper documentation showing this is his assigned spot, and that you've violated the parking rules multiple times. I don't care about his documentation. I'm the president of this HOA, and I park where I need to park." "That's not how it works," Joey said, his voice patient but firm. "If you have an issue, you can collect your vehicle from our impound lot once you pay the fees." "What fees? This is ridiculous." Joey pulled out a clipboard. "Standard towing fee is $225, plus $25 per day storage, plus the $150 emergency service fee that Mr. Dawson paid to have someone come out during a storm warning. $400. Are you insane?" "Those are the rates, madam. You can pay with cash or card when you pick up the vehicle." Brenda turned her fury back to me. "You are going to regret this, Kenneth. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. I'm going to have you removed from this community." "On what grounds?" I kept my voice steady. "I'm following the community rules. You're the one breaking them. My spot was blocked by a delivery truck. I had nowhere else to park. You could have parked in a visitor spot, or one of the 6 empty guest spaces, or you could have waited for the delivery truck to leave. Instead, you took my spot that I spent 2 hours clearing this morning. I saw you clearing it and I knew you would not mind. You saw me clearing it, so you decided to take it. That makes it worse, not better. Joey finished securing the Lexus. All right, we're all set here. Madam, here's the card for Angelo's Towing. We're located on Industrial Drive. You can call when you're ready to pick up your vehicle. I'm not paying $400. Then you are not getting your vehicle back, Joey said simply. After 30 days in impound, it becomes property of the towing company. Have a good evening, folks. Stay safe in the storm. He climbed into the cab of the tow truck and pulled away, Brenda's Lexus secured on the flatbed behind him. She stood there in the swirling snow, shaking with rage. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, she hissed at me. No, Brenda. You made the mistake when you decided the rules don't apply to you because you're HOA president. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to move my truck into my actual parking spot before the blizzard gets worse. I walked back to my truck, feeling her eyes burning into my back. My hands trembled slightly as I started the engine. I had never been good with confrontation, but something about Brenda's entitled attitude had pushed me past my limit. I carefully maneuvered my truck into spot 42, directly in front of my townhome where it belonged. Inside, I locked the door and watched through the window as Brenda stood in the parking lot for another minute, clearly trying to decide what to do. Finally, she pulled out her phone and made a call, gesturing wildly with her free hand. After a moment, she marched back toward her own unit. My phone rang 30 seconds later. It was Marcus. Dude, did you actually have her car towed? I did. That's the most badass thing I've ever seen. The whole complex is talking about it. Jennifer from Unit 58 was watching from her window and texted everyone. Great, now everyone knows. Are you kidding? Everyone is thrilled. Brenda has been terrorizing people for months. Last week, she threatened to fine me because my son drew a picture with sidewalk chalk in front of our unit, said it was defacing common property. The kid is 6 years old. She's out of control. No argument here, but man, she's going to come after you hard. Let her try. I followed every rule in the book. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I made dinner and tried to relax, but I could not shake the feeling that this was far from over. Brenda was vindictive, and she had the weight of the HOA behind her. Sure enough, at 8:30 that evening, there was a loud knock on my door. I checked the peephole and saw Brenda standing there with 2 other people, Gerald Hutchinson and Pamela Reeves, the other 2 board members of the HOA. I opened the door but did not invite them in. Yes. Brenda stepped forward, her face set in a grim expression. Kenneth Dawson, the HOA board is formally notifying you of a special disciplinary hearing to be held tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. You are accused of harassment, abuse of authority, and creating a hostile living environment. I had your car towed because you parked in my assigned spot. That's not harassment. You towed my vehicle right before a major blizzard, putting me in danger and preventing me from accessing emergency services if needed. You have legs. You can walk. And if you needed your vehicle, you should not have parked it illegally. Gerald, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Kenneth, this behavior is unacceptable. Brenda has explained the situation, and the board feels your actions were extreme and punitive. Did she explain that this was the 3rd time she parked in my spot? Did she explain that I sent her 2 emails asking her to stop? Did she explain that I spent 2 hours clearing that spot this morning? Pamela, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair, shook her head. Regardless of the circumstances, You should have come to the board with your concerns instead of taking unilateral action. She is the board president. I did go to her directly. She ignored me. The hearing is tomorrow at 7 p.m., Brenda said coldly. Attendance is mandatory. If you fail to appear, we will vote in absentia, and I can guarantee you will not like the result. What are the possible consequences? Fines up to $5,000, restrictions on parking privileges, or termination of your lease agreement. You cannot terminate my lease because I had a car towed from my own parking spot. We can terminate your lease for creating a hostile environment and refusing to work cooperatively with the HOA board, Brenda shot back. I took a deep breath. Fine, I'll be there. Is there anything else? Just pray the board feels merciful, Brenda said, then turned and walked away with Gerald and Pamela following. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Brenda was using her position to retaliate against me for daring to stand up to her. The problem was that she controlled the board, and the board controlled the HOA rules and enforcement. I spent the next hour researching New York HOA laws and regulations. What I found was both encouraging and disturbing. HOAs had significant power over residents, but they also had to follow their own bylaws and could not act in an arbitrary or discriminatory manner. If I could prove that Brenda was retaliating against me for exercising my legal right to have a vehicle towed from my assigned spot, I might have grounds for a legal challenge. The snow fell heavily throughout the night. By morning, another foot had accumulated, and the wind howled constantly. I watched the news while drinking coffee, seeing reports of road closures and accidents across western New York. The blizzard was living up to its billing as a historic storm. Around 10 a.m., my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, Mr. Dawson. This is Angela Chen from Angelo's Towing. I'm calling about the Lexus we picked up yesterday evening. Yes. We've had approximately 30 phone calls from Brenda Mitchell demanding we return her vehicle without charge. She's claiming the tow was illegal and threatening to sue our company. I paid for that tow and I have all the documentation showing it was legal. I know. Our driver took photos of everything. The issue is that Miss Mitchell is now claiming she's going to report us to the Better Business Bureau, the state licensing board, and every other regulatory agency she can think of. She's also called the police. My stomach dropped. The police! An officer came by this morning. We showed him the documentation and he agreed the tow was legal, but Miss Mitchell is relentless. She's called the impound lot 8 times this morning alone. My staff is getting worn down. I'm sorry about that. Is there anything I can do? Just be aware that she's escalating this situation. The officer mentioned that she was talking about filing charges against you for theft or something. I don't think it'll go anywhere given the documentation, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Thank you. I appreciate it. After hanging up, I sat down heavily on my couch. Brenda was trying to involve the police now. This was getting out of hand. I pulled up the Buffalo Police Department's non-emergency number and called. Buffalo Police, how can I help you? Hi, my name is Kenneth Dawson, and I'm calling to make sure I have my side of a story on record. I had a vehicle towed from my assigned parking spot yesterday, and the vehicle owner is threatening to file charges against me. Hold on, let me connect you to someone who can help. After a brief wait, a different voice came on the line. This is Officer Patricia Gomez. I actually just came from Angelo's Towing regarding this situation. Are you the townhome resident? Yes, madam. Mr. Dawson, I reviewed all the documentation with the towing company. The tow was completely legal. You had every right to have that vehicle removed from your assigned spot. Miss Mitchell is upset, which I understand, but she doesn't have grounds for any criminal charges against you. She's threatening me with all sorts of things. She's the president of my HOA, and she's called a disciplinary hearing for tonight. That's a civil matter between you and your HOA. What I can tell you is that from a criminal law perspective, you did nothing wrong. Miss Mitchell parked in your assigned spot repeatedly, you documented it, you gave warnings, and you had the vehicle legally towed. That's textbook proper procedure. Thank you, officer. That's a relief. One piece of advice: document everything. Every interaction, every email, every meeting. If this HOA situation escalates, you may need that documentation. I will, thank you. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the hearing. I printed copies of every email, every photo, every relevant section of the HOA bylaws. I made a timeline showing the 3 times Brenda had parked in my spot. I included the weather forecast from yesterday showing the incoming blizzard and my receipt from paying Angelo's towing. The snow continued to fall. By 5 p.m., we had received nearly 30 inches, and the news was reporting that Buffalo was effectively shut down. The governor had deployed the National Guard to help with rescue operations. People were stranded on the highways. It was a legitimate emergency. At 6:45, I bundled up and walked across the complex to the clubhouse. The wind was brutal, cutting through my coat and stealing my breath. Snow drifts reached halfway up my thighs in places. The walk normally took 3 minutes. Tonight it took 15. The clubhouse was a small building with a meeting room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. When I arrived, Brenda was already there with Gerald and Pamela. Brenda had clearly found a way to retrieve her vehicle because I had seen it parked outside her building earlier. She must have paid the fees, which probably made her even angrier. "You're late," Brenda said as I shook snow off my coat. "I'm 10 minutes early. The hearing starts at 7. We're starting now. Sit down." I took a seat at the long table, positioning myself across from the 3 board members. Brenda shuffled some papers dramatically. "Kenneth Dawson, you are here because of serious violations of community standards and HOA policies. Specifically, you engaged in harassment of a board member, created a hostile living environment, and took punitive action that endangered a resident during an emergency weather situation." "That's not accurate," I said calmly. "I had a vehicle towed from my assigned parking spot after documenting repeated violations and providing multiple warnings. You towed my car right before a blizzard." Brenda's composure cracked slightly. "I towed your car at 6 p.m. when the forecast said the worst of the storm would not arrive until midnight. You had 6 hours to retrieve it. The impound lot is 15 minutes from here in normal conditions. You chose not to get it until today. The roads were already getting bad. Then you should not have parked illegally and forced me to take action." Gerald leaned forward. "Kenneth, why didn't you come to the board with this issue?" I came directly to Brenda via email twice. She ignored both messages. She is the board president. I assumed she would handle it professionally. "You could have called an emergency board meeting," Pamela suggested. "Can residents call emergency board meetings? That's not in the bylaws I read." Pamela looked at Brenda, who pressed her lips together. "Residents can petition for a meeting, but the board decides whether to grant it." So Brenda would have decided whether to grant my petition to discuss Brenda's parking violations. Do you see the conflict of interest there? "You're being deliberately difficult," Brenda snapped. "I'm being logical. You parked in my spot 3 times. I asked you to stop twice. You ignored me. I took legal action. That's not harassment. That's enforcement of the community rules that you, as board president, are supposed to uphold." "The board has discussed this matter," Gerald said, and we feel that a fine of $3,000 is appropriate, along with a formal written apology to Brenda. $3,000 for what? What rule did I break? Section 7.3 of the bylaws. Residents must maintain harmonious relationships with neighbors and board members. I pulled out my copy of the bylaws. Section 7.3 says residents should strive to be good neighbors. It's an aspirational guideline, not an enforceable rule. There's no penalty structure attached to it. We're attaching one now, Brenda said. You cannot retroactively create penalties for actions that already occurred. That's basic contract law. This is not a court, Kenneth. This is an HOA hearing. We make the rules. Actually, you enforce the rules that already exist. You don't get to make up new ones on the spot to punish people you don't like. Pamela looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should table this discussion and review the bylaws more carefully. No, Brenda said firmly. We're voting now. All in favor of a $3,000 fine and mandatory written apology. Brenda and Gerald raised their hands. Pamela hesitated, then slowly raised hers as well. Motion passes. Kenneth, you have 30 days to pay the fine and submit your written apology. I stood up. I'm not paying that fine and I'm not apologizing. This is retaliation, pure and simple. I'm going to fight this. Then we'll move to terminate your lease, Brenda said, her eyes glittering. Go ahead and try. I'll see you in court. I walked out of the clubhouse into the raging blizzard, my mind racing. Brenda had just made a serious mistake. By issuing a clearly retaliatory fine without proper justification, she had given me grounds for a legal challenge. The question was whether I wanted to invest the time, money, and energy into fighting an HOA. The answer came to me as I struggled through the snow back to my townhome. Yes, absolutely yes. Because if I did not fight this, Brenda would continue to abuse her power and make life miserable for everyone in the community. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first was to a real estate attorney named David Morrison, who specialized in HOA disputes. His receptionist said he was snowed in at home but could do a phone consultation that afternoon. At 2 p.m., my phone rang. Mr. Dawson, this is David Morrison. Tell me what's going on. I walked him through the entire situation, from Brenda's repeated parking violations to the towing incident to the disciplinary hearing and fine. When I finished, David was quiet for a moment. This is one of the clearer cases of HOA abuse I've heard in a while. They cannot fine you for exercising your legal right to have a vehicle towed from your assigned space. The fact that the board president was the one violating the rules makes it even worse. So, what are my options? File a lawsuit against the HOA for selective enforcement, retaliation, and breach of their fiduciary duty. HOA board members have an obligation to act in the best interest of all residents, not use their position for personal benefit or revenge. How much will that cost me? My retainer is $5,000. The total cost depends on how long it takes and whether it goes to trial. But here is the thing. If we win, the HOA has to pay your legal fees. New York law allows for fee shifting in HOA cases where the board acted in bad faith. So I could get my money back. Potentially, yes. Plus any damages we can prove. Have you suffered financial harm from this situation? I paid $150 for the emergency towing service. That's something. But the bigger issue is the harassment and retaliation. That's worth pursuing. Do it. Draw up whatever paperwork you need. I'll get you the retainer by the end of the week. Excellent. In the meantime, do not pay that fine and do not write any apology. Don't give them anything they can use against you. Over the next 2 weeks, while Buffalo dug out from the historic blizzard, David Morrison filed a lawsuit against the Willow Creek HOA in New York State Supreme Court. The complaint alleged selective enforcement of rules, retaliation against a resident for exercising legal rights, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brenda did not take it well. She started issuing violation notices for everything she could think of. My garbage bin was supposedly out too long. My front light was allegedly too bright. She claimed I had unauthorized items on my patio, even though it was just a small grill that dozens of other residents also had. Each violation came with a threatened fine of $200 to $500. David told me to ignore them all and forward everything to him for the lawsuit. "She's digging her own grave," he said during one of our calls. "Every bogus violation notice strengthens our case that she's retaliating against you." In March, the HOA's attorney filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, arguing that internal HOA disputes should be resolved through the association's own processes before going to court. David filed a response pointing out that the HOA's processes were controlled by the person accused of wrongdoing, making them inherently unfair. The judge denied the motion to dismiss and ordered both parties to attend mediation. The mediation was held in early April at a conference room in downtown Buffalo. Brenda showed up with Gerald and the HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Linda Carmichael. I came with David. The mediator, a retired judge named Arthur Klein, laid out the ground rules. "We're here to see if we can resolve this dispute without going to trial. Let's start with Mr. Dawson's side." David presented our case methodically. He showed the documented parking violations, the ignored emails, the timeline of events, and the pattern of retaliatory fines after I filed the lawsuit. When he finished, Judge Klein turned to Brenda. "Miss Mitchell, why did you park in Mr. Dawson's assigned spot?" "There was a delivery truck blocking access to my area. I had to park somewhere." "Why not a visitor spot? They were all full." David pulled out photos he had taken on the day in question. These photos, time-stamped at 6:15 p.m. on the day of the towing, show 4 empty visitor parking spaces. Brenda's face reddened. "Well, I didn't see those." "Or you saw that Mr. Dawson had cleared his spot and decided to take it because you're the HOA president and figured no one would challenge you," David said. "That's not true." Judge Klein held up a hand. "Let's focus on resolution. Miss Mitchell, do you acknowledge that you were parked in Mr. Dawson's assigned spot?" "Yes, but it was a temporary situation due to circumstances beyond my control." "And Mr. Dawson had the legal right to have the vehicle towed?" Brenda looked at Linda Carmichael, who nodded reluctantly. "Technically, yes. So the towing was legal, but you used your position as HOA president to fine him $3,000 for taking that legal action. He should have come to the board first. He came to you directly, which the evidence shows you ignored. You are the board president." That should have been sufficient. The mediation went on for 3 hours. Judge Klein made it clear he thought Brenda had abused her position and that my lawsuit had merit. Finally, he asked for settlement proposals. David leaned back in his chair. "Here's what my client wants. 1. All fines against him dropped immediately. 2. All bogus violation notices withdrawn. 3. Brenda Mitchell resigns as HOA president. 4. The HOA pays Mr. Dawson's legal fees to date, which are currently $6,500. 5. A formal policy implemented that board members cannot issue violations or fines against residents they have personal disputes with. 6. $2,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress." Linda Carmichael shook her head. "Those terms are outrageous." "We'll agree to drop the fines, but nothing else." "Then we'll see you in court," David said pleasantly. Brenda leaned over and whispered urgently to Linda. They had a hushed conversation, then Linda said, "Can we have a private consultation?" Judge Klein nodded. "Take 15 minutes." David and I went to a different conference room. "They're going to come back with a counter-offer," he said. "Brenda's scared. If this goes to trial and we win, the damages could be much higher, plus all our legal fees. She's also worried about what discovery will reveal." "What do you mean?" "In discovery, we can subpoena all HOA records. If Brenda has been abusing her position with other residents or if there are financial irregularities, it all comes out. She doesn't want that." When we returned, Linda made their counter-proposal. "We'll drop all fines and violation notices against Mr. Dawson. We'll implement a policy about board members recusing themselves from disputes they're personally involved in. We'll pay $5,000 toward legal fees, but Miss Mitchell stays on the board and there are no cash damages." David looked at me. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to push for everything and watch Brenda squirm in court, but another part was tired of the fight and just wanted peace. "I want her off the board," I said. "That's non-negotiable. She's proven she can't separate personal feelings from her duties." Linda and Brenda conferred again. Brenda looked furious, but Linda was clearly advising her to take the deal. "Fine," Brenda finally spat. "I'll resign from the board, but I'm not resigning from the HOA entirely." "That's acceptable," David said. "But the policy must state that former board members who resign due to ethics complaints cannot serve on the board again for at least 5 years. More whispered consultation. Linda nodded. "Agreed." Judge Klein had us sign a formal settlement agreement that afternoon. All fines against me were dropped. All violation notices were withdrawn. The HOA paid $5,000 of my legal fees, meaning I was only out of pocket $1,500. Brenda resigned as HOA president effective immediately. A new policy was implemented requiring board members to recuse themselves from any issue involving a resident they had a personal dispute with. Walking out of that conference room felt like a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. David shook my hand. "You did good. A lot of people would have just paid the fine and moved on. By fighting back, you made the community better for everyone." But the story was not quite over yet. 2 weeks after the settlement, I received a call from Gerald Hutchinson, who had become interim HOA president after Brenda's resignation. "Kenneth, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. When we did an audit of the HOA finances as part of the transition, we found some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" Brenda had been authorizing payments to a landscaping company called Greenscape Solutions. "The thing is, we've been using Riverside Landscaping for years. I called Riverside and they confirmed they're still our contractor and have been billing us appropriately." "So who is Greenscape Solutions?" That's what got interesting. I did some digging. Greenscape Solutions is owned by Brenda's brother-in-law. She's been paying him for services that were never rendered or that were already being done by Riverside. My stomach dropped. "How much money are we talking about?" "Over the past 8 months since she became president, about $32,000. That's embezzlement." "That's what our attorney said. Linda Carmichael advised us we need to report it to the police. I wanted to let you know before it becomes public." "I appreciate that. What happens now?" "The board is meeting tonight to vote on whether to file a police report. I think it's going to be unanimous in favor." That evening, I watched from my window as a Buffalo Police Patrol car pulled up to Brenda's unit. 2 officers went inside and stayed for about 30 minutes. When they left, Brenda was with them, her hands cuffed behind her back. The next day, the local news reported that Brenda Mitchell, former president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, had been arrested on charges of embezzlement, theft, and fraud. The investigation revealed that she had created a fake company and had been funneling HOA funds to it for months. Marcus called me immediately. "Dude, did you see the news? I saw the arrest last night. Gerald gave me a heads up. This is insane. All of this started because you had her car towed." Well, the towing just exposed her true character. The embezzlement was probably happening regardless. Still, you're a legend in this complex now. You took down a corrupt HOA president. I laughed, but it felt hollow. I had never wanted to be at the center of drama. I just wanted to park in my assigned spot without hassle. Over the next few months, more details emerged. Brenda had been using the stolen HOA funds to support her lifestyle, paying for her Lexus, her designer clothes, and expensive dinners. Her husband, who worked in sales, apparently had no idea what she was doing. When he found out, he filed for divorce. In August, Brenda pleaded guilty to embezzlement and grand larceny. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant she had to sell her townhome to cover the debt. The Willow Creek HOA underwent significant reforms. Gerald served as president for 6 months while new elections were organized. In those elections, 3 new board members were chosen who were committed to transparency and fair enforcement of rules. They implemented quarterly financial audits, required 2 signatures on all payments over $500, and created an anonymous reporting system for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. As for me, I just wanted to get back to normal life, but normal had changed. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before would stop and chat in the parking lot. People would wave and smile. I became known as the guy who stood up to the corrupt HOA president, which was flattering but also a little embarrassing. On a cold evening in December, nearly 10 months after I had Brenda's car towed, I was carrying groceries from my truck to my townhome when Marcus called out to me. "Kenneth, hold up." I turned to see him jogging over, a bottle of wine in his hand. "What's up?" "Some of us are getting together at the clubhouse tonight, sort of an anniversary celebration. It's been almost a year since you had Brenda's car towed and started this whole chain of events. We wanted to say thank you." "You don't need to thank me. I just wanted my parking spot." "Yeah, but you could have let it go. Most people would have. Instead, you fought back and it exposed corruption that was hurting all of us. The HOA is better now because of you." I felt my face flush. "I don't know about that. Come on, 8 o'clock, just for an hour, please." I agreed, and that evening I found myself in the clubhouse with about 20 of my neighbors. Someone had made a banner that said, "1 year of good governance," which made everyone laugh. There was food and drinks, and a surprising amount of warmth directed at me. Jennifer from Unit 58, whose son Brenda had threatened to fine over sidewalk chalk, made a toast. To Kenneth, who proved that standing up to bullies is always worth it, even when it's scary and hard. "Thank you for making Willow Creek a better place to live." Everyone raised their glasses. I felt genuinely moved. Gerald, still a board member even though he was no longer president, pulled me aside later. "I wanted to apologize to you personally. I went along with Brenda during that disciplinary hearing because I was afraid of her. She had a way of making people feel like disagreeing with her would bring consequences. I should have been braver. It's okay. I understand the dynamic." "No, it's not okay. Board members are supposed to protect residents, not enable abuse." I learned a valuable lesson, and I promise I'll do better going forward. As I walked home that night, my breath fogging in the cold air, I thought about the past year. Had I known where having Brenda's car towed would lead, would I still have done it? Probably. Because sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing, and avoiding conflict just enables bad behavior. The parking spot in front of my townhome was cleared of snow, ready for me. I had cleared it myself that morning, and no one had parked in it. That simple fact, something that should have been automatic and unremarkable, felt like a victory. Inside my townhome, I made a cup of tea and settled on my couch, thinking about everything that had happened. The towing, the confrontation, the bogus fines, the lawsuit, the settlement, the criminal investigation, and finally the resolution. It had been exhausting and stressful, but also strangely empowering. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thanks for coming tonight. You're a good neighbor and a better person than Brenda deserved to deal with. Sleep well, my friend." I smiled and texted back a thank you. The blizzard that had been raging on the night I had Brenda's car towed was long over, but it had left its mark. That storm had been a turning point, the moment when I decided I was done being passive. The storm outside had mirrored the storm brewing in our community, and when it cleared, everything was different, better, I thought. Everything was better. I looked out my window at the peaceful parking lot, the snow-covered townhomes, the warm lights in windows. This was home, and it felt like home again in a way it had not in months. Brenda Mitchell had tried to use her position to intimidate and control people. She had abused her power, stolen money, and made life miserable for dozens of residents. All because she believed the rules did not apply to her and that no one would dare challenge her authority. She had been wrong. And I had been right to park my truck in spot 42, the spot I had spent 2 hours clearing, the spot that was assigned to me in my lease agreement and protected by HOA bylaws. I had been right to call Angelo's Towing when I found Brenda's Lexus sitting there for the 3rd time. I had been right to refuse to pay bogus fines. I had been right to hire David Morrison and file a lawsuit. Sometimes being right means fighting back, even when it is scary. Especially when it is scary. I finished my tea and headed to bed, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Tomorrow I would go to work, come home, park in my spot and live my quiet life. That was all I had ever wanted, and thanks to one phone call to a towing company on a snowy February evening, it was what I had. The story could have ended there, but there was one final chapter that came the following spring. I was checking my mail one afternoon in May when a silver sedan pulled into the visitor parking area. A woman in her 30s got out, looking around uncertainly. She walked up to me. "Excuse me, are you Kenneth Dawson?" "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Rachel Stevens. I'm a reporter with the Buffalo Chronicle. I'm writing a story about HOA abuse and corruption in Western New York, and your case came up in my research. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was more attention. But Rachel seemed genuine, and if my story could help other people dealing with corrupt HOAs, maybe it was worth telling. "Sure. Let me get my mail and we can talk inside." Over the next hour, I walked Rachel through everything that had happened. She took notes and asked thoughtful questions. When I finished, she sat back and shook her head. "This is exactly the kind of story I'm trying to tell. HOAs have enormous power over people's lives, but there's very little oversight. Board members can abuse their positions, and most residents don't know they have rights or how to fight back. I got lucky. I found a good attorney and had the money for a retainer. But you also had courage. Most people would have just paid the fine and lived with the harassment." I was tired of being pushed around. Rachel's article came out 2 weeks later on the front page of the Buffalo Chronicle's local section. It was titled, "How One Man's Fight Against His HOA Exposed Corruption and Changed His Community." The piece detailed my experience, but also included interviews with other Willow Creek residents and legal experts discussing HOA reform. The article went viral locally. It was picked up by television news stations and shared widely on social media. I received dozens of emails and messages from people dealing with their own HOA nightmares, asking for advice. I replied to as many as I could, always with the same message. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to push back when someone abuses their authority. One email stood out. It was from a woman named Helen Ortega who lived in a different townhome complex in Buffalo. She wrote, "Dear Kenneth, I read your story in the Chronicle and it gave me hope. Our HOA president has been terrorizing residents for years. She issues fines for ridiculous violations, plays favorites with rule enforcement, and creates a hostile environment for anyone who questions her. After reading what you went through, I contacted the attorney you worked with, David Morrison. I'm filing a lawsuit next week. Thank you for showing me that standing up to bullies is possible. You changed my life." I read that email 3 times, feeling a strange mix of pride and responsibility. My battle with Brenda had not just been about parking spots or personal vindication. It had become something larger, an example that fighting back against unfair authority was worth the effort. Summer arrived, and life at Willow Creek continued peacefully. The new board was functioning well, enforcing rules fairly and transparently. Community events were better attended. People seemed happier. On a warm evening in July, I was grilling on my patio when Marcus came over with a 6-pack of beer. "Mind if I join you? Pull up a chair." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the parking lot. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You know, I've been thinking about that night you had Brenda's car towed. If you had known everything that would happen afterward, the stress, the lawsuit, all of it, would you still have made that call to the towing company?" I considered the question seriously. "Yeah, I would." Because living under Brenda's tyranny was its own kind of stress. At least by fighting back, I was doing something about it instead of just accepting it. "That's what I figured you'd say." Marcus took a sip of his beer. "You're a good man, Kenneth. This community is lucky to have you." "I'm just a guy who wanted to park in his own spot." "You're a guy who stood up when it mattered. That's not nothing." As the evening wore on and the sky darkened, I thought about how one small action, one phone call on a snowy February night, had cascaded into something much larger. I had exposed corruption, triggered reforms, inspired others, and ultimately made my community better. But at its core, it really had been about something simple: the right to park in my assigned spot without harassment. Everything else had flowed from that basic principle. The grilling finished, Marcus headed home, and I cleaned up my patio. Inside my townhome, I looked at the folder on my desk that contained all the documentation from the past year and a half. Emails, photos, legal documents, news clippings. It was a record of a battle I had never wanted to fight but was glad I had won. I thought about Brenda, serving time in prison for her crimes. I did not take joy in her downfall, but I also did not feel guilty. She had made her choices, and those choices had consequences. I thought about all the residents of Willow Creek who could now live without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. That was worth the stress I had endured. Most of all, I thought about the principle at the heart of everything: that rules exist to be applied fairly to everyone, and those who abuse positions of authority should be held accountable. It was a lesson that extended far beyond HOA parking disputes. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. It was about refusing to be bullied or intimidated. It was about believing that one person could make a difference. And on that July evening, standing in my townhome looking out at my cleared parking spot in front of my building, I knew that I had made a difference. Not a world-changing, headline-grabbing difference, but a real, tangible improvement in the lives of the people around me. That was enough. More than enough. The parking spot sat empty, waiting for my truck when I needed it tomorrow. No Lexus SUV would be sitting there. No vindictive HOA president would ignore my requests to move it. Just an empty space with the number 42 painted on the curb, assigned to me, protected by community rules that were now enforced fairly. Sometimes victory looks like something small. Sometimes it looks like a parking spot, and sometimes that is exactly what matters most.